whenever I mention that, we have a product called Genome Patri, a lot of people come to me and they say, you should go and get these pundits and babas to actually sell this for you. And I said, well, I am a new Acharya, so there goes, right? So what I'm going to talk about is, is entrepreneurship in your genes? Right? So many people say, is there a gene that determines entrepreneurship? Which would be a very useful tool for venture capitalists to say that, I would do this test and be able to say, will this person be an entrepreneur? Yes, no, right? Now, the thing is, I'm a Marwadi, right? What does that mean? So there's it elicits a reaction from a lot of people because there are a lot of Marwadis who are good entrepreneurs, right? But the reason for that are many. So one is that Marwar is a region it's a deserted region. So which means the climate is fairly harsh. The people who were in that Marwar and Shekhawat region, the moneylenders over there, were eventually moved out by the king because the services were no longer needed. So when they went out, they became part of a community. They supported each other. And because of that sense of community and because of the fact that they nurtured each other, they became very successful as entrepreneurs. But also, there are some things that are found in their genes as well. So what else can you do, which is saying, how do you nurture entrepreneurship? Now, when you're born, you grow up with people, the peers, your parents, and others. There is a certain thing that they kind of nurture within you. So even though you might have many different things going on, there is an element of nurture that happens. So for instance, I think in my case, my dad allowed me to be able to say, go earn your own money within this context. But the fact is, even though we were 4 siblings, not everybody took those same challenges the same way as, let's say, I did. And that's my daughter. She was there last week. I took her to the Inc. conference, and we had a little booth there. And she was very excited. I said, I'm going to give you a phone, or I'm going to give you X if you're able to sell X number of Genome Patris. And so she did. So she did a lot of pitches. So I think part of it was saying, can I nurture this kind of behavior and be able to reward them on that? But I have 2 kids. One does take to that positively, the other doesn't. So part of it is personality, part of it is genetic, and I think that's what I wanted to talk about. So I think one is that the reality is that genetics doesn't have a deterministic effect on entrepreneurship, but it does have a probabilistic effect. And I'm going to go through some of the reports, some of the studies that have been done in this area. So what are the kind of qualities that we look for in an entrepreneur, right? What will actually help us being good entrepreneurs? And I think one of the interesting things is, do we have the right coping mechanisms? Do we have the impulsivity to take those decisions quickly? Can we modulate arousal effectively? And be able to get the attention abilities that you need? So in certain studies that was found, and these were some of the other studies, they said 37 to 42%, there is a role of genes in your tendency to become an entrepreneur. But it doesn't mean that if you had those genes, you would become an entrepreneur, right? So they affect our chemical mechanisms in the brain, and I'll go through some of those genes as well. They also influence certain characteristics like extroversion, as well as neuroticism. The other thing is, it is how you react to environmental stimuli, and then whether our genes allow us to select in the environment that we are choosing in, and whether we have high tolerance for stress. Now, this is an interesting study that I found, because it said that, you did a study on women and did a study on men. And it was interesting that women were found to be much more likely to be dependent on genetic factors because the environment for them was much harsher, right? And I think that's, so the 2 characteristics that you looked for were extroversion and neuroticism, which played an important role in women being an entrepreneur. But for men, it was also the environmental conditions that were out there. Then there was another very large study that I found on twin studies, because they share most of their genetic material. So when you did that, they looked at 5 different factors. They looked at openness, they looked at extroversion, they looked at neuroticism, and so on. Interestingly, we found that the phenotypic correlations between those in that twin studies were only 2 things. One was openness, and the other was extroversion, right? So these were the 2 things that actually correlated. And here is where the genetic material is most similar. So you may ask, what are we, when we are doing a test, do we actually do this? No, we don't. We won't tell you whether yes, no, you'll be an entrepreneur. But what we can do is, we could look at your personality, and we could tell you if you have certain genes that might actually help you. Now, what are those? So the one interesting gene is called the COMT gene, which is called both the happy gene, or it's called the worrier versus the warrior gene, right? And the reason for that is simple. This gene actually helps you determine whether it affects how your mood is, how your pain threshold is, and so on. So when you look at all that, you see that given the kind of conditions we grow in, that is an important gene to look at. The others, which are more like the BDNF, and a lot of these dopamine-related genes that we look at, or serotonin, or oxytocin for the nurture capabilities, all of these genes are genes that are very important for us to be able to say, can I understand what my personality type is? Not that this is going to say, if you have a personality type and you're trying to be somebody else, I think that's where the challenge is. You can certainly have anything that you have, but if you know what your genetic material is, you are likely to be able to make that much more effective. The other one, like you can see, some of my other favorite ones are ANK11, right? And the dopamine receptor. So this helps us understand the environmental stimuli as well as addiction habits. Now, I don't know how many of you are, when you're an entrepreneur, one of the things that matters is you pick on something, you have the passion, but do you have that obsession to be able to go out there and say, I'm addicted to this thing till I finish it, right? So there is some of that we can study. So these are some genes that I thought would be interesting, and all of these things are what we would cover in a Genome Patri. Now I'll go through some more stories on nature versus nurture. All of you recognize that guy, Usain Bolt, right? Now, if you look at Usain Bolt and you look at all the studies that have happened on the Jamaican athletes, we found that there is the ACE gene, where if you had the D allele, for instance, then you had better response to training, you are likely to have a larger than heart capable of pumping, and we found that West Africans had a higher frequency. But the reality is, if you look through history, and you found that what really happened, why is it you found these guys having a good, what happened to their genes? And I think the interesting story is that 10 million people were forcibly removed from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade, and Jamaica was the last stop. So if you look at it again, you move them out of their comfort zone, and you put them somewhere else that causes that change in your genes. Then there is another gene called the ACTN3 gene, right? This determines whether you are likely to be a sprint athlete or you're likely to have the endurance gene. So the reason we were all, as human beings, we all started off having the sprint gene. But when there were famines and there were droughts, we mutated to actually preserve that energy that was there. And as a result, a lot of us did not have that sprint gene. And so a larger majority of us have what is the endurance gene. Now, I do have the sprint gene, and I could have been an Usain Bolt-like, but I didn't do anything about it. So I guess that's where the difference is. You can have your genetic material, but if you don't do anything about it, nothing happens. The other thing is, I think genomics is widely used in cancer. It's used for diagnosis, it's used for treatment. It's also used for being able to understand if you're likely to have those genes or not. But you ask yourself, right? If it's cancer, I'll anyway get it. So can it be prevented? And so I took one of the latest studies that is out there. This was in September of this year. And this was a very large study done. There are 89,571 women and 46,333 men. So there was a study done on this large group of people. And they said, OK, fine, we'll pick these set of people who have a healthy lifestyle, and we'll pick a set of people who don't have a healthy lifestyle. Now, what do we mean by a healthy lifestyle? And they determined that the parameters were, you don't smoke or you haven't smoked in the last 4 or 5 years, that you did not have more than a drink a day for women and 2 drinks for men, that you also exercise vigorously for 75 minutes or 150 minutes of normal exercise. And what they found was very interesting. So they've created what they call as a potential attributable risk. And so if you look at the 16,000 women who had the healthy lifestyle and the 11,000 odd men who had the healthy lifestyle, they found that the 20 to 40% of the cancer cases could be prevented and 50% of deaths could be prevented. Now that's a huge number, right? They also found that lung cancer, 82% of women and 78% in men can be prevented because the majority of your risk is smoking. So these are just some examples for cancer. The other is also, people say, heart disease is in my family, so does it mean I will get it, right? Now, yes, there is a very strong genetic contribution of heart diseases in cardiovascular diseases. But there are 2 things, right? There is the modifiable and there is the non-modifiable. What do I mean by the non-modifiable? You can't change your family. You can't change your age. You can't change your gender. You can't change your genes. But what you can change is your high blood cholesterol, is your high blood pressure, it's smoking, it's alcohol, and poor diet. Now, when we look at all of this, the American Heart Association came up with a statistics that said 80% of those could be prevented. And then I take another example. Many of us have diabetes running in our families. But if you ask most people when they come to us, they say, yeah, I just have high blood sugar. It's not diabetes, right? Now, I have a family history of diabetes. So far, so good. But people should know that high blood sugar or the starting off your diabetes can cause a lot of different complications like heart attacks, like a diabetic foot, like nephropathy, and so on. So there are a lot of different effects of what that high blood sugar can do. And if you're just taking medicines, double the dose, and so on, you've not done yourself what you could have done to prevent it. So is it preventable? Absolutely. And I think you could do that by, if you understand, the earlier you do, the better. So my grandfather died of kidney failure. My father found out that he was diabetic at the age of 40. After that, he started making all those changes, right? So for me, one of the things he said was, you have to make it part of your lifestyle, otherwise it's not going to happen. Because once you get it, it's harder. So 90% of type 2 diabetes in women can be attributed to these 5 factors, very similar to what I mentioned. Now I'll get to some genome fun for the day. How many of us knew that we are 50% like a banana? Right? The other thing is, for those of us who were in, used a lot of, did biology experiments, we used the mice or the mouse as a model organism. So the reason we've used that, one of the reasons is 97.5% of our genomes match, right? There are certain things that don't match, which are the regulatory elements, the activity of genes of the immune system, as well as our response to stress. We are 99.9% like our neighbors, right? So out of the 3.2 billion base pairs that we all share, 99.9% we are similar to our neighbors, but it is that 0.1% that makes all the difference. The other thing is that if you look at metabolism genes, right, and you map all of that, now humans are very complex, and that's what we pride ourselves with being. But if you look at metabolism genes, the mustard weed has many more genes related to metabolism than a human does as well. So here I'll give some 2, 3 very small examples of what we have done to be able to help people, right? Now in all these cases, there's a role that genetics has played. So a sudden cardiac arrest, for instance, was prevented after we did genetic counseling for a particular client. When we looked at breast cancer, early diagnosis was done and therefore prevented once we were able to understand that. And then we improved the fitness and nutrition for a professional athlete because we were able to help them fine-tune those little things that they couldn't do after doing a lot of things that they were doing, right? So what we are trying to do is, we are a team that, this is my second startup, and it's been 16 years since I've been in the genomics field. So we wanted to be able to say, can we transform the way we look at genomics and technology within healthcare? And I think the real pride is that we have consumers who are participating in this, and that is going to change a lot of what we can do. So at this point, we do offer a lot of preventive tests. We also have diagnostic tests for cancer, for newborn screening. We also have infectious disease panels as well. And so I think what we do intend to do is to be able to expand that scope, make it accessible to most consumers that are out there. Now, the question I ask all of you is, I've given you all some examples of stories that have been done across the world, but in the Indian scenario, we do not have a study done on the Indian entrepreneurship thing. So I was thinking, does it make sense for us to be able to do that? And as before, like I end many of my talks, or begin most of my talks, I wrote a little poem to help you all understand a little bit on what the role of nurture versus nurture can be. And because nurture your nature was another thing that I'd written earlier, I'm calling it the CRISPR version. So if you're looking for that gene to blame your future or the past that has been, you forgot your role. That's way beyond hyperbole. It's what connects your body and soul. It's important that you know yourself. Genes have a role, said the genome elf. But the diet and workout you'll have to do yourself. I've given you her story and history. You get a genome patri, and you can get your own story. Read books, don't make health a mystery. Science has helped us understand our genomic software. CRISPR means to design a babies. Are you aware? Nurture your genes, build habits that you can cherish. If you know yourself, then you won't quickly perish.
I liked about what you presented about, the endurance versus the sprint in our genes, and how endurance takes, precedence over sprint because of the feminine and everything. But if you look at in Olympics, our performances is almost dismal, right? Have you done anything to pick the athletes based on their genome patri?
Absolutely. I think that's part of, we have a product called Genome Patri Fit. We have done that for a few professionals, and we hope to bring this much more mass and commercial level. What we are trying to do is to help them understand if, let's say, I have a cousin who is a professional swimmer, right? One of the things he told us, he said, you're doing very well, but I'm still coming fourth, third, sometimes I come first when it's small, but so one of the things we did was we said, okay, what is it that you have? Do you have endurance? Do you have sprint? And based on that, we said, you focus on the ones that are likely to give you success. And she did. So I think some of it is like that. Some of it is more professional. Some athletes that I can't name right now. Hopefully in a few days I can. But the reality is, if you look at institutions like a Gopichand and others, they have also done the nurturing well, right? It is, the same thing with Jamaicans. They created those schools of being able to nurture these well. So I think one is to be able to say, how well do I know my athletes? But the second is to be able to say, have I done the right things for that person to make them successful, right? So I think for us, we are still in that early stages in India where we have not been able to understand that. But I think once we start getting to know our athletes better, whether it's genetics, whether it's understanding their reaction times and various other things, I think we'll be able to do much, much better than that. And I think the good thing is, over the last 2 years, I've seen so many people interested in this space that I'm confident that by next Olympics, we'll have many more athletes doing much better. Our medal tally will be much better. Thank you so much.
Investment philosophy is actually we are really early stage focused. So especially at the seed stage, so we usually want to be the first investor for the company from the outside. I mean, except the founders actually or families, but we want to be the first investor to the startup.
We like to support company growth and then working together to make the bigger ecosystem. And then basically we are opportunity basis, but we like to focus on more like a mobile internet technology company.